So welcome everybody to Sustainable Menstruation. This is a conversation on the environmental, cultural, health, and financial impacts of menstruation and actions we can take. This is part of our virtual Earth Day celebration that is happening now to April 30th. And it's hosted by HSC Sustainability, which is a student-funded initiative. And if you're interested in learning more about the Earth Day activities, you can go to our website at unthsc.edu/Earth Day. Students and employees here can get a free water bottle for participating, and this event counts towards one of those, so you can learn more about that. All right, before we go on, I just want to mention we have 3 speakers today, and then afterwards we're going to do a question and answer session. We're going to save all questions for the end, so if you do have a question, feel free to chat it in the box, and then we'll address it after all 3 of us have spoken. And now we'll get started. So first I want to introduce Dr. Amy Rains-Millenkoff. She's an assistant professor here at the HSC in the Department of Pediatrics and Women's Health. And she leads research and intervention programs focused on maternal and women's health. And she teaches courses focused on maternal health and community resources in the School of Public Health and TCOM. So with that, Dr. Rains-Millenkoff, I'm going to stop sharing so that way you're able to share.
Okay. Great, thank you. Okay, I just want to make sure, are you able to see my?
Yes.
My presentation, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great, so we can go ahead and get started. So again, my name is Amy Rains, and I am with the Department of Pediatrics and Women's Health. And when Sandy reached out to me to talk about this, on this topic, I was very interesting because it's something different that I haven't done before, but like most women, I feel I'm an expert on menstruation. And so I knew that I could talk about it in a way that was hopefully that is, I'm stumbling here. I knew that I'd be able to talk about the topic well. So I'm going to talk a little bit beyond the biology of menstruation, and we'll go ahead and get started. One of the first things, I know that most of you are on mute, but I want you all to think to yourself about menstruation and having your period, and what are the many words that come to mind, because it's not usually, we really don't talk about menstruation, but we talk about, we use euphemisms for it. So here's a few of the ones I got kind of collected, ones I hadn't heard before, like riding the cotton pony, but the girls' flu, the red wedding I hadn't heard before, but certainly ant flow is something that was often used.
And sorry, Dr. Rains, I just want to stop you for a second. So it's still showing your first, the presentation. It's not moving on if you've moved on slides. No, I think you need a, yes, and then start from current slide. Now? Yes, it just wasn't moving with you. I think you need to either start from your current slide and then.
Okay, let's try it now. Can you see it now?
Yes, I see it. It just wasn't moving with your talk yet.
Okay, let me see. Okay, so you're seeing now the list of words that we use for euphemisms for period, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, so I can go on to the next slide. So just kind of, I wanted the participants to think about things and words that they've used, or they still use, or maybe parents use, friends use, instead of actually using the word menstruation. Has it advanced to the next screen? Sandy?
Sorry, I was on mute. It hasn't. You may just have to, I don't know, because did you try to say, like, start the slideshow from the current slide?
I see what you're saying. Just keep moving it to the current slide.
Or for some reason it's not working. Maybe just click on the number below. Like, so now you'll click on slide 4.
How about I just do it like this?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, apologize to participants, but here we are. Okay, so just as brief history of menstruation, this is particular to the USA. So you can see how the difference and change in how much younger we're getting when starting our period. So in 1840, the average age was 16.5. And so we've come quite a ways down to 12.8 in 2010. And what the thinking is behind this is that the higher intake of animal protein is associated with reaching menarche by 12 years and 8 months. So some of the things that we have to consider with our periods is that our hygiene access needs, having the need for privacy, doors that lock. And this is a nice graphic that really illustrates this point well. Water and soap available to wash hands, bodies, and any reusable products. We need access to these services day and night, and something we may not think about, but lighting. Culturally appropriate menstrual waste disposal options. Public and community toilets should be separated by gender. And that's something that's interesting. We probably talk about in our question and answer session. And also provide access to menstrual products that have hooks, shelves, and mirrors, safe and conveniently located and accessible for all women. So these are some of the things that we take for granted, I think, in the United States, because most of us, but not all, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, have access to these hygiene needs during our period. So here's some of the challenges that we face. So cultural, religious, rural areas, schools, low and mid-income countries, in homeless shelters and incarcerated populations. So you really, if you ask the question, where did some of these menstrual taboos come from? I'll talk about the cultural aspect first. They're almost universal, and the thinking is that they developed pre-language, probably with the association with blood. But in some societies, and this is where I'd like to really focus our attention, the menstruation is seen as powerful, healing, protective, and sacred. It enhances female autonomy. Some examples of that would be actually reducing workloads during a period, when you're having your period, and in some cultures seen as purification. So that's not necessarily where our country has been, and I'll show you some reasons why the thinking is that has where we've gotten some less than ideal ideas about periods in a second.
And Dr. Rain, sorry, I'm going to stop you for just a second. We're going to request to try to make it full screen. So Katrina said that you might be sharing the slide screen and not the slideshow screen if you have multiple monitors. So maybe we could try to stop screen sharing and then try to do the, Katrina, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and give us some help here. So if you want to go ahead and stop screen sharing your...
Do you have multiple screens?
Yes, I do.
So maybe if you try to share the other screen instead, I guess. Because we're seeing like the blue, yes.
You're seeing it now?
Well, it's still the same screen, I guess. I'll try to start this slideshow now. No.
So it's for some reason it's not clicking on the slideshow. And you try to do from current slide.
What about at the bottom? There's a where you were earlier. Let me see if I can still see it. On the bottom right, it shows different views.
Oh yeah.
Next to comments, those.
Maybe that presenter view. Use presenter view. Maybe not that one.
Okay, let me see.
Yeah, if you uncheck presenter view, that would probably work. You're right.
I have no idea. I've never noticed that before.
Up on the right side, you see it says use presenter view right there to your left of the arrow.
To my left. I'm not seeing the same thing you are seeing. Oh my goodness. Okay.
At the top where it says automatic, do you see that? The little drop down? Monitor automatic under the light bulb.
Go a little bit right some more.
On the slide, on the
yes, now right under Acrobat,
yes,
use
down.
presenter view. No, one more down. No, back to automatic. There you go.
Okay.
See if that.
Oh, yes.
There we go. That works.
Yay.
Okay, I apologize. What a stressful beginning. Okay, let me get back on track here. So this is a conversation anyway, and not a formal presentation. So I think we'll be good. So here we are. We're talking about menstrual taboos being almost universal, but some societies see it as a positive thing and something that's sacred. And gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could get to that point? But there's been some things that have interrupted that process, and I'll go through those in a little bit. But one of the things research has shown, and this is old research, but it bears some, it's worth mentioning that in cultures with higher participation of males in child rearing and childbirth, that there are fewer taboos on menstruation. So a better understanding of the reproductive process, the better understanding of their, well, in terms of male and female partners, their partners' situation in the body, then there's less taboos. And that makes sense in a lot of ways. So where do we get some of these? First, if you go back to the Bible, and this is often comes up, in the United States being built on the traditions that it was. If you go into Leviticus, it talks quite a bit about how unclean women are. And so you can see some of these verses here that talks about when she has a regular flow of blood, she'll be unclean until evening. Anything she sits on will be unclean. The bed that she sits on will be unclean. If a man lies with her and this flow touches him, he will be unclean. And when a woman has actually blood or discharge outside of the period, or the menstrual time period, she will be unclean. So we get these messages that carry on through society. But it's not just the Bible. This is in the Quran that talks about go apart from a woman during the monthly course. Do not approach them until they are clean. So this idea that women are unclean, this cultural idea that has persisted. And this one, of course, is my favorite, and I'd like to read it word for word. This is from the Latin Encyclopedia that come from 73 AD that talks about contact with menstrual blood turns new wine sour. Crops touched by it become barren, grass die, seed and gardens are dried up, the fruit of trees fall off, the edge of steel and the gleam of ivory are dulled, hives of bees die, even bronze and iron are at once seized by rust, and a horrible smell fills the air. To taste it drives dogs mad and infects their bites with an incurable poison. So this is really graphic and strong language talking about how horrible this time period is for women and how terrible this stigma and this cultural taboo against blood and the menstrual cycle. So these are kind of things that kind of set forward some of the cultural stigmas that we have today. And this is at its extreme, and you may have read about this. This is the idea of the menstrual hut, where women in some countries are asked or told or made to go to during their menstrual cycle. It can be very unsafe for women. Young girls have been known to be killed in these menstrual huts. It's been outlawed in many places, such as Nepal, but it still exists in some rural areas. So one of the things, so you can see where these cultural taboos, they started. And I think fortunately, maybe my generation will be the last generation that has such strong feelings. I grew up in an era where my mother barely talked about menstruation, and it was still embarrassing to talk about it in public. It was during my age of growing up where we started to see commercials for menstrual products. And that was something that hadn't happened in the past. So I think the generations is changing, and we won't have the same kind of cultural taboos about talking about it. And when we're open about it, and of course, conversations like this helps that move forward. So we can see it more of, yes, recognizing that the pros and cons, if you will, about having a menstrual cycle, but the ways that we can manage it in a way that's sustainable, not just financially or environmentally, but also the emotional toll and the cultural aspect to it as well. But one of the things that has come into the light more recently has been the cost of menstruation. So the cost of tampons, the cost of pads, the cost of pain relieving, and even heating pads that we use often to help with the cramps that we get. So over a lifetime, this can add up. And this is particularly challenging for people that don't have access to menstrual products. And that includes, I do a lot of work in my research with refugee populations. So one of the things that was always bothersome to me was that when you come over as a refugee, most often you come over with nothing. You don't have anything. And you're provided with a certain time period for Medicaid and food stamps right away, which is great, except with food stamps, you can't buy menstrual products. So it left women in a bind where they didn't have access to these important resources, but at the same time, they didn't have money because they didn't have jobs yet. And so they were often left to get any way that they could and use any products that they could, which sometimes was rags that they would be able to secure, or they would, often churches would provide, and they still do, products, but only a few, not like a whole pack. And so it was a real challenge for women, refugee women that come to the US. There's also challenges for homeless populations, for incarcerated populations, populations that don't have full autonomy over their financial well-being. So this gives just an idea. Another issue related to the cost is that this issue of taxation, where usually luxury products were taxed under the same taxing mechanism that tampons and pads are taxed. So there's been a lot of conversation about repealing these tax laws that are really unfairly targeting women, which this is not a luxury project. I'm having trouble today. Luxury product, but actually a necessity for women. And this gives you an idea of some of the states, which you can see in green, that most states do tax products. One of the things that, COVID has really disrupted all aspects of our lives, and you may not have thought about it in terms of periods. Of course, life goes on, and just like this infographic says, periods don't stop for pandemics. So some of the ways that it's affected menstrual health and hygiene is obviously disrupted access to information, persisting period stigma and taboo. So if you think about being in lockdown, if you're in lockdown in a situation where you don't have a lot of freedom, and you may be in a situation where there is strong cultural taboos and stigmas, and that may make it difficult for you to manage menstruation. Also disrupted access to products, free distribution of products in schools, which I hope that we'll be able to touch on during our other presentations about the accessibility of students to products. And also just the chain. We saw that in toilet paper. Fortunately, it didn't hit quite in the US the degree that it did with toilet paper, but the supply chain being disrupted. And also lack of access to washing infrastructure. So this is really, if you look, people already have lack of access to water, sanitation, hand washing facilities, but this was even made worse in the COVID situation with all the things previously mentioned. So one of the things that's important to remember, if we think about overall the cultural aspect of menstruation, is that access to menstrual care products is important as toilet paper. That it's misogynistic to think that we should separate these as separate and something that should be taxed or something that's made hard to get. It should be as important as this executive director of the PAD project states, is clean water and food. It's not a privilege to manage one's period in a healthy manner. It's a basic human right. So this is just a brief presentation. I know it started a little rocky. Hope we'll get moving forward better. But just a kind of reminder of that, there's a lot of aspects to menstruation that we know we live it every day, we live it in our lives, but we may not think about it. And that's the cultural aspect, the financial aspect of menstruation. And so beyond the health, because that's one of the things that is more commonly talked about, is the cramping and the things that come along with menstruation, but we don't often acknowledge or talk about widely about these other aspects to menstruation. So I'm looking forward to hearing our next presentations, and thank you for your attention.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for that. And just a reminder, if you have questions, please post them in the chat box. We'll get to question and answers afterwards. And so now I am going to share my screen again. Bear with me 1 second. All right, can y'all see that? Sorry, I'm looking at the chat.
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. Well, my name is Sandy Bauman. I'm going to be presenting on the environmental effects of menstruation. And thank you, Dr. Rains, for that wonderful presentation. I learned a lot through it. So I'm looking forward to the conversation afterwards. So I am the sustainability coordinator here at the UNT Health Science Center, and sustainability is here in facilities management. So I do have a master's of science in environmental toxicology and environmental policy, and I love the focus on the intersection of environmental and public health. So with that, we will get started. Okay, so when you hear about environmental action, you may think a lot about single-use plastics. You know, you've heard about the straw ban, how a lot of places are going to those, you know, paper straws, and the bag ban, and you hear about, you know, animals being entangled in plastic, and then, you know, towards the bottom right, you see the BPA free. So there was that movement of just the chemicals and plasticizers that are in plastics. So, but one of the things that we don't hear a lot about is menstrual products that comes in that. And so, you know, plastic is really a wonderful resource. It's done a lot to advance our lifestyles, but it does have both health and environmental impacts that really bring calls for reducing our use of it. And with that, menstrual products have really gone under the radar and are, you know, commonly recognized as a source of single-use plastic. So, really, the average menstruator will use between 11,000 to 1,700, you know, products in a lifetime, which translates to about 250 to 300 pounds of garbage. And I don't say this to, you know, make us feel guilty about anything, but really just to bring our attention to the amount of waste that is generated through it. And so the waste really isn't our fault. It's due to a lot of different factors, a lot of which Dr. Rains covered, and a few more of which we'll discuss here. So what are these products made out of? Well, tampons are made out of cotton and rayon, but often with a thick layer of synthetic fiber, which often is plastic. And then, you know, you have the cord, which is also a type of plastic, can be polypropylene or something like that. And then, of course, the plastic applicator is a type of plastic as well. And then when we think about pads and liners, again, those are kind of a mixture of cotton and rayon, but again, a lot of different types of plastic and polymers. And then you also think about the plastic strip to make it stick to underwear, and then the wrapper is also plastic. So when we think about this, you can see that a lot of plastic is generated through it. And so what really happens to all this plastic after it's used? Well, there has been studies done on kind of calculating how much this, you know, how long it takes to break down. And they average that it could take 500 to 800 years for a pad to break down in the landfill. Now, for a tampon, it could take 6 months, but in reality, a lot of tampons are being covered with a layer of plastic, which makes it probably even longer. And so, you know, the reality is that, you know, in a landfill, it's not getting the oxygen, it's not getting airflow. So these numbers are probably an underestimate of how long it actually takes to break down. Now, if they don't make it to a landfill, there are things being found in our environment. So for example, plastic tampon applicators are actually getting in the news more of being found on like beach and ocean cleanups. And even, you know, being found in the stomach of seabirds and things like that. So there's calls for, you know, really getting companies to quit using plastic applicators. And then also, since plastic never really breaks down, it just goes down into smaller and smaller fragments called microplastics. And these microplastics really pose a threat to not only marine life, because, you know, like things like sea turtles and all sorts of animals can eat these things thinking they're food, and then they get a lot of plastics in them. But also, you know, there's been studies showing that microplastics are being found in bottled and tap water. And then there was a study done that shows that about 36% of fish have bits of plastic in them. So this is all sad information, but, you know, I don't want to, you know, leave us thinking that we can't do anything about it. So there are definitely things we can do, and especially if we, you know, several of us work together, we can really make an impact. So I just want to kind of go into some actions we can take. And one of the first things I think we can do is write to the companies and express concern. So you can write to a company if you really like a particular product, write to that company and say that you're interested in those products being made out of bioplastics. That's plastics made out of more plant resources and not petroleum plastics. You could also try going applicator free. So if you wear tampons, try just that one step of going applicator free to reduce that impact. And then there are definitely more natural disposable alternatives. I mean, even, I've seen things in Target and Walmart that are more naturally based products, whether those do have more plant-based plastic applicators or the global organic textile standards. That just ensures that materials are harvested through environmentally and socially responsible manufacturing processes, and that at least 70% of the cotton is made from organic cotton. And then also you can find organic items, and again, that's a way to minimize kind of synthetic pesticides that were grown with that cotton. So, and then there are definitely reusable products, which we'll be expanding on a little bit more today. So there are reusable pads and liners that are available. There's period underwear, and then there are menstrual cups. So menstrual cups are what we are going to be offering in our student food pantry. So this is going to be available for our students starting this week. And the student food pantry location where these are going to be at is in the Student Service Center room 232. And that is available for students in a confidential, private way, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 p.m. So with that, I want to welcome Betsy Drock. She is the founder of the Dot Cup, the cup that we are supplying here in our student food pantry. And the Dot Cup really believes that everyone with a period deserves affordable, safe, and sustainable period care. So that was, one key reason we really wanted to work with them. I know they work with a lot of different universities all over the country. They're a very high-rated menstrual cup on the market, and they've donated thousands of Dot Cups to people in need. So that was another reason we liked working with them, is because for every one Dot Cup that's bought, they give one to a person in need. So with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing and just remind everybody that you can post questions in the chat box. And after Betsy talks, then we'll get to our conversation and have a Q&A session. Take it away, Betsy.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Thanks. And thank you all for coming today to talk about periods. I really appreciate this. I've done a lot of events like this, and this was probably the one that I feel like had the most meat in the setup. So thank you, Dr. Rains and Sandy. Your presentations were perfect. So I couldn't have said it better myself. So I'll tell a little bit about my story quickly. My name is Betsy, as Sandy mentioned, and if you had told me, 10 years ago that I would be spending my days talking about periods and running a company that was in the menstrual space, I would not have believed you. I studied advertising. I live in Chicago. I moved to Chicago for the advertising industry. My background is in advertising and graphic design, and never thought I would own a company, especially one in the menstrual space. But sometimes life just surprises you. And so I was introduced to the menstrual cup actually about 10 years ago by my most environmentalist friend. She has chickens in her backyard. She's vegan. She's like always the person who introduced me to the new environmentally friendly products. And I was very hesitant to try one at first, as a lot of people are. I was like, I'm good with my tampons. I don't need to change it up. That sounds weird and intimidating. No, thanks. But she kept telling me about it, and I decided to go for it. And after, a 3-month learning curve, which the kind of industry as a whole agrees upon, this about 3-month learning curve, adjusting to a menstrual cup, similarly to tampons. I don't know about you guys, but for me, tampons were not an immediate click either. Back in the day, when we first get our period and we're handed a tampon, sometimes they go in cockeyed. Sometimes they feel scratchy. Sometimes they're uncomfortable and you have to take it out and put it back in, even as an adult. So there's a learning curve for both. It's just a different learning curve. Something that's becoming more so the norm, but isn't currently the top norm. So I decided to go for it. And after that 3-month learning curve, I was a menstrual cup evangelist. I told everyone I knew, you have got to try a menstrual cup. The sustainability reasoning wasn't even my top reason at the time. It was more just the convenience, the cost savings, the fact that you can use one menstrual cup for about 10 years. So you're saving lots of money, as we've already talked about a little bit, but also just the convenience being that a menstrual cup can hold about 3 or 4 times the amount of a super tampon. And so you really can kind of forget you're on your period throughout the day. Even if you have a heavier period, you can cut your time, your trips to the bathroom by about a third. So you're really just thinking about your period a lot less. You're dwelling on it a lot less. You're a lot less worried about leaks. So I became a menstrual cup advocate. Around the same time, I was also working in-house marketing for a global humanitarian organization called World Vision, and they do a lot of international community development, sanitation, and hygiene work. And it was then that I learned about the issue of period poverty, and that just did not sit well with me as something that is predominantly obviously impacting women and girls. And I came to learn really something that seems so simple and that we and myself had always taken for granted, can really change the course of an individual's life, but also the voice of women across the board. So if you live in rural Africa, for example, and you don't have access to menstrual supplies, as Dr. Rains kind of touched on a little bit, you're falling behind. A lot of times it's just easier to stay home. If you don't have menstrual supplies and you're worried about leaking while you're on your period, and a lot of people end up using unsanitary items like newspapers, cloths, rags, whatever they can get their hands on, which are not good for their bodies, but might prevent leaks, then sometimes it's just easier to stay home. So if you stay home a week out of every month over the course of your years in school, you're falling behind almost 12 weeks a year over the course of maybe 10 years or so. That's you're looking at about 2 years behind your male classmates. And consequently, a lot of girls end up just dropping out altogether because it feels impossible to catch up. A lot of times, if you drop out of school at a young age, you end up getting married young, you end up having children young. And when that happens, there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's happening to the majority of women and girls in a community, then that also is diminishing the voice of women because they're not able to finish school, they're not able to enter the workforce, they're not really given the respect or opportunities for leadership in the community. So it kind of creates this perpetual cycle of the voices of women being silenced, especially in the developing world. So this just didn't sit well with me, especially being new to the menstrual cup. There are a lot of great organizations doing work in the menstrual space, providing disposable products for free to organizations, but there's a never-ending need for that. And so with my new love for menstrual cups, I just thought, gosh, what a perfect solution to this issue of period poverty. That's not the solution, but it's a really powerful solution. So the buy one, give one model really made sense to me. And it was just an idea in my head that wouldn't go away. So after kind of ruminating on it for a couple of years, I decided to just go for it. And so I launched the company in 2018 on International Women's Day. So we just celebrated our 3rd anniversary, which is really exciting. And we've experienced a lot of growth since then. In when it comes to shops selling the dot cup, when it comes to getting to partner with universities to provide menstrual cups to students. But it's been an incredible journey, one that I'm really thankful to be on. And so that's a little bit of the background. So now I'll talk about kind of why you would want to switch to a menstrual cup. So it's been like I mentioned, a perfect lead up to this point, but here is a dot cup. This is what they look like if you've never seen one before. I've been asked at events and conferences if it's a bell. I've been asked if it's a lot of other things. It's not a bell. This is a menstrual cup. It's made of medical grade silicone. It's very flexible. A lot of people also look at this and think that looks way too small. I have a heavy flow that's not going to hold anything. And my reply to that is always that tampons are mostly cotton, covered in blood on the outside. So you probably actually bleed a lot less than you think. It just looks like a lot when you pull out a tampon that's saturated in blood. It's actually still mostly cotton. So this holds about 3 times the amount of a regular or even super tampon. It is extremely flexible and soft. Oh, the other thing I get is that it looks too large. So I get both ends of the spectrum. That looks like it's going to hurt. That looks too big. There's no way. And the thing about that is the way you insert it is by folding it. So one fold I always recommend for beginners is see if you can see it better if I lean, called the punch down fold. So you push down one side, kind of makes this shape. And then if you look at it here, it's actually about the same size as a tampon. So you insert it in your vagina, it pops open like that. I don't know if you could hear it, and then it sits all the way inside of you. You can't feel it, just like a tampon. It takes a little practice to figure that out, how to insert it properly. So it's not still kind of folded or cockeyed or anything, but it hugs the walls of the vagina. So it's a lot less likely to leak. A tampon is a sponge. When a sponge is full, it has only one place to go, and that's to leak out, to drip. But a menstrual cup serves as a barrier instead of a sponge. So when it's full, it just kind of starts to drop a little bit. You can kind of just feel it riding low, and that's your key that you need to go to the bathroom and empty it. That's how you to take it out, it's sitting up inside of you. You would slide a finger in, kind of push in, like I always say, like a hot dog bun. So you kind of squeeze it like this, pull it out, empty it in the toilet, and then you can either rinse it off and put it in, or just put it right back in, especially if you're in public, and clean it when you get home. It's your own blood. It's not going to hurt you. So that's kind of the basics of the menstrual cups. We've kind of discussed some of the reasons why you might want to switch when it comes to finances, when it comes to health, but you can save about $1,000 or more over the course of 10 years. So if you're using fancy organic tampons, it's even more. I always say I would rather book a flight to Paris or something than keep buying tampons. So that feels like a context, saving a lot of money. There's a lot of health benefits. Getting to know your body is one of them. So when I started using a menstrual cup, I didn't even know what a cervix was, let alone where it was. And so it's really empowering to get to know your body in that way, as I think we all should. The cervix is where the blood comes out. So you kind of have to figure out how to angle the cup so it sits directly beneath the cervix. If it's not, then, it's not going to do much good for you. So it needs to kind of sit below the cervix. Some people have a high cervix. So in that case, the cup will ride higher for them. Some people have a low cervix. So if that's the case, it might ride lower. And the stem of the cup is actually trimmable. So if you're somebody with a lower cervix, then you can actually trim the stem one notch at a time, even completely off, because as you can see, there's grip rings around the base of the cup too, that you can remove it without the stem. So another factor is there's a much lower risk of toxic shock syndrome with a menstrual cup. So to geek out science-wise a little bit, bacteria actually thrives on cotton fibers, and that's why with tampons, toxic shock is such a risk. But not that it couldn't happen with a menstrual cup, but I believe the last time I researched, there's only 2 or 3 documented cases of toxic shock syndrome with a menstrual cup. And both of those instances were when a menstrual cup was left inside of a person's body for, I think, maybe 48 hours or more. So that is not recommended. We recommend you wearing it for 12 hours maximum. But a medical grade silicone is a much more antimicrobial material. So it's difficult for bacteria to grow on a menstrual cup. And we recommend, washing it with soap and water in between uses, like when you're emptying it once a day, and then in between cycles, boiling it to make sure you're getting rid of, any leftover remaining bacteria. So getting to know your body, lower risk of toxic shock is a huge reason. I loved that Sandy touched on the applicator piece. So she covered a lot of great things sustainability related, but the applicator piece, one thing I wanted to mention is that recently on our Instagram, which is @.cup, if you want to follow along with us, I posted a photo of an ocean beach cleanup that they collected hundreds and hundreds of tampon applicators. And when I posted that photo, I was amazed at how many replies I got from our international followers in the UK, Australia, other parts of the world saying, what are those? Like, I don't know what that is. I've never seen that before. And that was crazy to me because I did a little bit more research and realized that the United States is one of the only countries that sells applicators with tampons. The rest of the tampon using world sells just the tampon, just the cotton part. But we have, as the United States, have found a way to further monetize and produce even more unnecessary waste through an already wasteful product. But that just really struck me. And when you think about it, the cotton part of a tampon serves a much greater purpose. The applicator is used for about 3 seconds and then discarded. And that even comes down to us being a little bit afraid or uncomfortable with our bodies, kind of to the cultural norm and taboo piece that Dr. Rains-Mellenkopf was talking about. So I think we in the United States especially have this sort of, we want there to be a separation between the bleeding part of us and the rest of us, and an applicator kind of serves as that barrier. But I think it's a wonderful baby step if you don't feel comfortable totally jumping to a menstrual cup, to switch to applicator-free tampons, or even there's a product out there called the Dame applicator, and it's a silicone reusable tampon applicator. So that's a great thing to consider. And then another benefit to using a menstrual cup is just the convenience piece that I kind of touched on a little bit. You're not having to rush to the drugstore when you start your period. Your menstrual cup is almost always either in a bag, in your purse, in your backpack, in your car, or in your medicine cabinet with you, or it's inside of you. So your whole period, it's inside of you, and it's just a cycle of emptying and washing and reinserting throughout the whole period. So it's extremely convenient. So, and the majority of people who switch to the dot cup, or any menstrual cup for that matter, but I'm obviously biased for the dot cup, find themselves saying, like, this is a period game changer. I can't believe I haven't used this sooner. I can't believe everyone doesn't know about this. It feels like this secret that once you tap into it, once you get over the kind of adjustment hump and learning curve, it just feels like, it feels very empowering, and it feels, because you realize that your period is one of the biggest producers of waste, that switching to a cup is one of the single most impactful ways that a menstruating person can to reduce their environmental footprint. So it feels empowering in that way. It feels empowering to get to know your body. And I kid you not, have so many people say, I actually look forward to my period when I'm using my dot cup. And that sounds weird, but it's true. It kind of feels like you get to know yourself. It kind of feels fun. It kind of feels interesting to see how much blood your body actually is producing each month, or each day, I guess. And I'll from there kind of go into some of the most common misconceptions or questions that I get about using a menstrual cup. So probably I would say, I already mentioned two, which is that's too large, that's too small camp. But another big one is, what will I do in public? Like, am I going to create a big mess in a public restroom? And a menstrual cup is no messier than a bloody tampon string. And I kind of touched on that earlier, but it's all the norm. Like our great grandmothers never used tampons, and it's my belief that our granddaughters probably won't either. It's this blip in the timeline of menstruation that I think will be very short in the grand scheme of things, but right now it's very much the cultural norm. And so so it's interesting to think about that from that perspective, that it is the norm right now. But so anyway, in situations where you're in public, some people feel totally comfortable just taking it out, emptying it in the toilet, putting it right back in. Like I mentioned earlier, it's your own blood. It's not going to hurt you. For others who, prefer to clean it, which is totally fine, I recommend either having some wipes in your bag with you, a bottle of water, taking it into the bathroom with you, pouring it over the toilet, giving it a rinse. I don't always recommend wiping it with toilet paper, because you're going to leave little particles from the toilet paper on your cup, but just rinsing it off, putting it right back inside. It's very simple. Or I'm also an advocate for confidently walking out of the stall, washing it in the sink, and going back. 50% of the population of the world menstruates, and it's about time we didn't treat it as such a secret or feel like we needed to hide it. So, it's probably a lower percentage of people that would feel comfortable doing that. But overall, it's much simpler than you might think, especially if you're in public. And the other thing is, that you'll probably end up needing to empty it a lot less frequently than you might think in public because of what I mentioned. I have a lot of people who reach out and say, my period got lighter when I started using a cup. And that's actually not the case. It's just that your body produces less blood than you might think, or than it might appear when you're removing a tampon. So since it holds more. So those are some of the basics around, common questions that I get, what people respond with. And it's such a privilege to be at a university that's willing to have this conversation, that's willing to provide you the opportunity to claim a menstrual cup. We've partnered with about 15 universities now. And, one university, our first one actually was Northern Arizona University back in 2018. And I flew down there this was pre-COVID, when we did our launch event with them, and we set up a table in the campus health department. And before we could even get our table set up, we had a line of 100 students waiting to claim their menstrual cup. So that was really exciting. I think it's something that more and more people are becoming aware of, are becoming an advocate for. Another university, Eastern Michigan University, did a survey with students and found that 19% of the respondents said that their ability or inability to purchase or afford menstrual products impacted their studies in some way. And I thought that was a pretty powerful percentage as well. And it was very helpful in their planning to think that students that were right on their campus, this is not just, period poverty is not just an issue in the developing world. It's an issue with our neighbors, our friends, our classmates. And period products can be expensive. And like Dr. Rains mentioned, they're not always covered by food stamps or by other programs. They're taxed in most states. So it's a privilege to be able to afford and purchase and be educated even on multiple forms of menstrual products and menstrual solutions. So I thought that survey really said a lot. And so it's become a passion of mine specifically to make sure that all menstruators have access and just the knowledge of the broad range of menstrual products that they could choose from, but also access to them and affordability for them. So I believe that menstrual cups are going to be a huge part of the future of period care for people who have the means to purchase them and people without the means. And so that's why we have our buy one, give one model at Dot Cup, that for every Dot Cup purchase, one is given to someone in need. Anyway, that's kind of why I'm here, why I'm passionate about this. I know that was kind of a lot. I'm happy to go into more of the Dot Cup, usage, different folds, different ways of inserting or using or cleaning, if that's helpful. But I would love to hear questions. No question is a stupid question. I've heard them all down to, is this a bell, like I mentioned? So please ask away. But thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here and having this conversation.
Thank you so much, Betsy. So we're going to answer a couple questions that have already been posted in the chat box. Again, if you want to post a question, feel free to do it in the chat box, or afterwards you can unmute yourself and ask, and we can have a conversation. So the first one is, do prisons give access to inmates menstrual cups? Do they give access to menstrual cups in prisons? Do either one of y'all know that?
That's a really good question, and something that I've done a little bit of research on, and is definitely, to my knowledge, I don't believe many do, but that's on my long list of things that I would love to partner with prisons to make Dot Cups accessible to inmates. I'm really glad whoever asked that question thought of it, because I think that that's really important. It's a group of people that are often forgotten, and I think that it's definitely on my radar. I would love to be able to donate Dot Cups to prisons. But yeah, in most cases, from what I've heard and from what I've researched, I think that it almost always is just pads. And even then, sometimes it's scarce. And I've heard stories of menstruating inmates having to wear the same pads over and over again because of a lack of supply and a lack of access, which is really unfair and unfortunate.
And most states don't have any laws about providing menstrual products to women that are incarcerated. So what happens, it becomes a bargaining system with women and guards and staff just trying to get the products they need. So they have some that they can buy, but they have to have money on the book. So it's really exemplifies how poverty plays a role in access to resources for menstruation. So I think that it's an area wide open for more work and advocacy for women and the incarcerated.
I agree.
I wanted to piggyback on that. Just so I know whenever we reached out to some local organizations to ask if they were willing to take the extra dot cups, they kind of said, "Oh, we take pads and tampons, but they didn't even consider the cups." So I didn't know kind of what the acceptance was, because for a lot of people it is a new thing. It's different. So I just kind of wanted either one of y'all could expand on that.
Yeah, from my experience, that was definitely an early learning for me with dot cup is working under the probably privileged assumption that everyone would be glad to take a dot cup when they realize that it's better for your body, better for the environment, cost effective, all of those things. But what I've since learned is that you can't force somebody to use a product even though you know that it might be better for them and for the planet and for their wallet. But pads and tampons are definitely the norm, and there's tends to be a lot of education necessary for switching to a product like a menstrual cup. And some people just don't feel like taking on the mental load of learning something new, or might not have the ability to have places to empty it or to change it or to clean it. So there are definitely some barriers there that I've run into as well. And I always love when I work with an organization that sometimes it just comes down to the people that run the organization or the person who accepts the donations being familiar with the menstrual cup. And if they are willing to take on some of that education piece a little bit, because we always make sure that the organizations that we donate to, there has to be an in-person, whether through Zoom or through a pantry or an in-person moment where they can give them a little explanation of how to safely use it, how to safely clean it, how to insert it. And so I think that complicates it a little bit, I guess. But more and more organizations, I think, are realizing the benefits of a menstrual cup and at least providing it as an additional offering even to their disposable products.
Okay. So there's one question that said, asked if the cups we're providing here at the Health Science Center are just available to students and not employees and staff. And I just wanted to address that real quick. Yes, right now, the way we did it because of the COVID restrictions was to just have the cups available for students only as part of the student food pantry, because that's something that's open, it's accessible to the students, and it's readily available without any hand contact. And also it's a student-funded initiative. That's another reason, but we do hope to either give some sort of a discount or something to student or to employees in the future. So with the next two questions, it's more on kind of how to use it, but that is okay. So sorry, somebody asked more how they can get a cup on campus. That is available in the SSC room 232, the student food pantry. That's available there. So again, you can go there, they're available, it's anonymous, it's confidential. So somebody asked, is it okay to sleep in a menstrual cup, and how does the 12-hour rule play into that? And then also, would the use of menstrual cups increase the risk of VVC or bacterial infection?
Questions. Yeah, so it is definitely safe to sleep with a dot cup or a menstrual cup in general. That is one of the great benefits, because it's very much unlikely that it will leak since it hugs the walls of the vagina and does, a thing I didn't mention is it creates a slight suction. So there are some little holes around the edges of the dot cup or any menstrual cup that sort of create like a suction inside of you that help hold it in place as well. The dot cup has a pretty flexible cup body and a little bit more firm rim, so that helps hold it in place as well. So sleeping with it is great. Swimming, running, rock climbing, yoga. We have tons of active people, so menstrual cup is a really great option for active people. And then when it comes to bacterial infections, it really is the same answer as toxic shock syndrome. So there's just a very much lower likelihood that there's going to be any form of bacterial infection compared to tampons, just because bacteria, it's a more antimicrobial material. That's why they use silicone in baby bottle nipples and pacifiers and even washing machines, because it's more difficult for bacteria to grow or mold to grow on that material. And boiling once a month after in between cycles kind of helps with that as well.
So that's all the questions we have, but if anybody has any questions they want to chime in, one thing I did want to mention is the cups actually come with directions and that kind of stuff. So, you know, a lot of it may be a learning curve at the front end. And one of the best pieces I got advised whenever I started using a menstrual cup was to give it a couple cycles, to not just do one cycle and then be like, oh, that didn't work for me. So yeah. I didn't know if Betsy, you want to talk about that as well.
Yes, I would love to talk on that, because there's nothing that makes me more sad than when I hear someone that's like, I tried it one day and I just couldn't, I can't do it, I'm done or something. And I'm like, no, what would you have done if that was your attitude with tampons? You know, like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't always go perfect at first with a tampon either. So it does take some getting used to. I always recommend relaxing your muscles. Maybe have a glass of wine, maybe if you're old enough, maybe put one foot up on the bathtub. Maybe I always like personally to insert, clean, reinsert in the shower. I do the whole thing in the shower. So you can empty it right down the drain, wash it off with soap and water, put it right back in the shower. You can do the whole thing in the shower, and it's very easy. And it's also kind of a good position for some people to put one leg up on the bathtub when you're learning. Another way, so I showed you the punch down fold, which is pushing down one side like that. But the way I actually like to do it is just called the C folds. You just literally fold it in half. Some people will do like a cinnamon roll where it's a little bit harder sometimes. You can fold it a few times, basically just get it as small as you can. And it pops open pretty easily. So once you get a little bit more comfortable inserting, this is a little bit larger than the other fold, but once you get more comfortable, you can put it in and it still pops open pretty well. But yeah, I find that most people who are committed, like if you mentally decide, I want to use a menstrual cup, I'm going to figure this out, I'm going to make it work, because I want to get to the point where everyone is singing their praises and saying like, I can't feel it, it lasts all day, I don't leak. Then I would recommend wearing panty liners for the first few months. Just in case you have it in a little bit shifted or a little bit folded up still, I recommend once it's in, doing some Kegels or pulsing your muscles. And then one really important thing is when it comes to removal, don't remove by the stem. So the stem is here to bring the cup down, to, especially for those with a high cervix, to bring it down. So you might have to, for me personally, I have a high cervix, so my cup rides pretty high. So the first time I was using a menstrual cup, I thought it was lost inside me forever. And that happens a lot. Some people think like, I can hardly touch the stem, which seems hard to believe, but it's way up there. So you have to bear down with your muscles a little bit, or push like you're having a bowel movement, or like you're having a baby, or like it's a reverse Kegel. So you have to bear down. Once you can grab the stem, that's for wiggling it down. So pulling it down, giving it a wiggle. And to remove, this is an important, very important piece of advice. Since I mentioned the suction, you have to firmly squeeze the base of the cup to release the suction. And that also is going to make the surface area smaller when you remove it. So if you try to remove it like this, you've got a pretty small hole that this larger circle is going through. It's not going to be very comfortable. So you want to release the suction by squeezing it, but you also want to push it in so it's smaller surface area when you remove it and empty it. So the stem is to bring it down. The base of the cup is what you actually use to remove. So if you try it, just make the decision, I'm going to give this 2 or 3 periods. I'm going to really try. I'm going to try different folds. I'm going to make it work. And in most cases, I really think you'll be happy that you did.
It sounds good. Well, it's 1 o'clock. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I really want to thank Dr. Rains, Milenkov, and Betsy for being here today, for talking about this. I know a lot of people are expressing gratitude for having this conversation. So So thank you all for being here and thank you for participating. We will have this video posted on the sustainability playlist on the UNTHSC YouTube channel. So that will be available for later viewing if someone wasn't able to join us today. But thank you all and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.